Okay, this is Atlas's 32nd session and his 6th in the round pen, where we're just working on a bunch of different things. So in this one, I just cut out a bunch of the other stuff because it's just the same as we have been doing until we got to this point, and he got a little worried with the lash on his pole, so he decided that he did not like that and just left, which is fine. He came back, but he's showing me that he's not comfortable having that lash behind his ears or the whip touch behind his ears at all. So I'm just going to desensitize and go back a step on his face, and he's worried about just that whip going up by his ears, up over his head. So I'm just kind of deciding to see what exactly it is he's worried about. Is he worried about the whip being above his head, the whip behind his ears, the lash touching on his pole? Like, what exactly is it? So I'm just gonna kind of like touch right there. So he doesn't like the lash or the whip behind his head. But he comes back, so he's not running away completely. That's good. So I'm trying to like just do like a little quick one there, and then he just decides to leave. So that's too much for him. So if I was going back and doing this again, like, I would stop trying to do it over his head. Obviously he's worried about having it there, so just go back to targeting it and then having it touch his face, having it touch up by his eyes, having it touched by his ears, and just kind of building from there. Then if you didn't want to use positive reinforcement, again, going back and just like having him touch his nose, having it touch up his face, having it touch his eyes, having it touch his ears, and just really lightly and just rubbing it without having the movement. So a good part of this is I'm going to get used to the movement of the whip. So I am going to break it down. Like, it's not perfect stuff, not exactly as I would do it now, but the whole Mustang thing is just an experiment. So I would have added in the positive reinforcement, but for this part, I did break it down enough to where I'm just moving the whip, and I'm just trying to get that part first. So I can't have him be touched with the whip behind the ears or the lash without moving the whip up. So I'm just going to get him used to that first. So when he comes up, I'm going to stop and back away. So I was continuing to move the whip up and down while he was moving until he stopped. And then when he stopped and faced me, and then now he's coming toward me, so I'm going to stop and back up. So I'm going to retreat. I'm not going to chase him with it, but I want him to just get used to having that whip moving up above his head and nothing bad happening. Because me touching him with the whip behind his ears is too much. Especially with the lash, it's too much. He doesn't like it. And he's way over threshold there. So which he was when he started getting worried and his neck came up and his eyes get wider, then he's already over threshold. So, but at the time I'm just trying to figure things out. So you only know as much as, you can only do as much as you know. So that's what I was doing at this point. Now that I'm voicing it over, it's been a bit more time. So there's different things I would like to change about it, but it's still a very good learning tool. So I'm still going nice and easy and just having the whip come up and then backing away and relaxing. So that's really good. So he's getting used to it already. Like, he's not running away and he's not freaking out too much. So that's nice. So I'm just going to work with that with his other whip too. This lunge whip, I'm not going to try and touch him or anything with the lunge whip behind the ears because the lash is just too long. If he's not comfortable with that short lash on the driving whip, he's definitely not going to be comfortable with the lunge whip. So here, when he's just he looked at the mounting block, he rubbed his face on his leg, he's just showing some calming signals. So he's trying to just relax himself. So he's worried. He's trying to go back from that worried state into a relaxed one, and he's just kind of looking at something else. So it'd be equal to you, or you're kind of in just like an uncomfortable situation. So you're gonna like look at your phone, or look out the window, or do any different. There's many different things. So horses usually will look away. They'll kind of investigate. They'll rub their head on their legs, and then now he's kind of gotten a little bit more relaxed. He's licking and chewing. So I stop moving the whip and just let him look at me and get the lick and the chew, because that releases the endorphins, and I want him to kind of associate me with those. So I give him a minute, and then I'm just going to go back to just nice and slow, bringing that whip up and then down. So I'm just breaking it down for him. So I want him to be okay with the movement, and then we'll go with the touch, and then we'll go with the movement and the touch of the lash. So I'm just breaking it down into steps. So if I was going to do this over again now, I would have used the positive reinforcement, because I feel like, especially for Atlas, he understands things a whole lot better when he knows exactly what it is that I want, and he's a lot more fearful than other horses. So he's not pushy, he's not trying to be bad, he's just afraid. So it helps him to understand that these things aren't scary. So I would have had him target the driving whip with his nose, and then I would have touched him with it on his face and worked my way up to the pole, and then to touching him behind the ears, and then to touching him with the lash, and just always adding in the positive reinforcement every time it touches him. So, and then just waiting until he's not showing me a sign of stress, like he's not trying to leave. He can stay there. If he decides to leave, or he's getting tense in his neck and his face, then I'll stop, I'll back up, give him a minute, and then start again. So all of that, when he just left there, he was showing again some displacement behaviors. He's grazing on the grass. He's kind of being like, oh, this is, I'm not here. Like, I'm just going to just kind of ignore the situation. And then I continued, so he left. So those behaviors can go either way. He can show displacement or a calming behavior, and then it can calm himself, or he can not become more calm and then leave. So in that case, he left, but then I asked him to come back, and he did come back. So that's good that he did take some direction there, but I would like him overall to come back on his own. But I'm still working on just moving that lunge whip or driving whip up and down, and just letting him get used to it. Like, it's not a big deal if it goes above your head. It's okay. So there's a lot of bugs out, so we're all chasing some flies here. But for him, like, it was good if I swatted a fly or moved my head or my hands, because they would get a little worried about that. So now they're fine with that, because they just were afraid of any extra movement that I made. So, but I'm just kind of working on that a little bit more. I'm getting a little bit closer here, because he's coming toward it. So he's not quite as afraid. I'm trying to stay in the center of him so he can see the whip moving on either side. And this is also just some regular desensitizing that I would do. So again, here he goes. He rubbed his face on his leg, and then he went back to grazing, and I'm just going to keep going. And then there I stopped as soon as he brought his head up and his attention came back to me. Then I'll go ahead and start again. So if I was going to add some positive reinforcement into this, where I was moving the whip up and down, every time the whip would go up, I would click, and then I would feed him. So then he associates that driving whip going up with food. So I think that would have helped me out a little bit here. But you can also do it just without the positive reinforcement as well, and this is how I would do it. I just probably would have slowed down a little bit in the beginning and saw some of those thresholds and backed up, give him a minute, and then tried to bring the driving whip just to his nose instead of trying to go back and touch him on the pole with it. And at the time, I'm trying to see what is it exactly that he was worried about, but I think it made it worse in the end, because then he's just like, oh, it scares me. And then I kept doing it to him, and he's like, okay, it still scares me. So then it just makes a little bit more work for me to fix overall. So I would have gone a little bit slower. So if he, he's opens his eyes a little bit more, he's breathing a little harder, his neck gets tense, and he'll stop there, back up, give him a second, let him relax, and then come back a little bit easier, like a step lower than I was. So if I was touching him up by the ears, I come back to his nose and work my way back up. So I just don't want to push the issue as much. I know a lot of trainers are like, you don't want to release the pressure when they're worried. And to an extent, yes, you don't. But with him, especially with horses who are super fearful, there's no use in pushing past that threshold. They're not going to learn anything. It's always going to be worse than if you could keep them at a lower one, below threshold, where they're in a learning state of mind. But when they go above that, they're not learning. They're just reacting. He's just leaving and not thinking. So like he'll stay there, and then he'll look away, he'll give a displacement behavior, and then he leaves. He's trying to stay, but he's just too afraid. So nothing good can come from that. I mean, it is good to know that I can bring him back so he leaves and he comes back quickly instead of just running and running and running. But I would like him to just not leave in the first place, but that takes a two-way conversation. So I'm asking him, are you okay with this? And he's saying no. But when I'm not listening to his side of the story, I say, are you okay with this driving whip, by touching him on the face? And he gets tense and says no. And then I'm like, okay, how about I go further? And then he leaves because he's afraid. So if I was like, here, do you want to hold the spider? And you were like, no. And instead of putting the spider away, I shoved it in your hands, then you would get up and run away. So that's kind of what that would be equal to with people. So I fast forward through that part where I'm just kind of touching him on the neck again with it. So he got pretty used to the movement of it. He wasn't horribly worried about it at that point. So I got some good desensitizing from the movement of the whip. So like here, like when I was touching him with the driving whip and the lash was going over his withers, he was leaning away and like his body was tight. Then he went ahead and took that whole step away. So I'm gonna go back, just rub on his neck, let the lash touch his withers. So again, he's like, not so cool with the lash situation. So every time the lash would touch him, I'd want to click and then feed. But if you're not going to use positive reinforcement, I'd do it like this. Like he was okay with me touching him with not now because he's leaving, but the second ago he was okay with me just touching him on the neck with the driving whip, not having the lash over top, and then I just want to stay as far away from the ears as I can. So he was not cool with me touching. So here I've gone back a step, which I'm going to fast forward through because you've all seen this before in other videos, but I'm just going back and starting at his head, working my way down, and he's okay with these things. So he's like, okay, I'm okay with just having the driving whip on him. He's worried about that lash. So I'm going to start as far away from the ears as I can. So on his withers I just did, and then I try to do it as fast as possible. So like not in I'm going to do it really quick, but I'm going to leave the lash on for a short amount of time as I can, and then I immediately backed away and retreated. So again, I come back with something he knows. I'm going to rub it on him, toss it over his withers quickly, and then take it off and release. So I don't want to go right back to the ears and the pole and scare the crap out of him again. I'm going to start on the withers and then slowly work my way forward, and with nice pauses in between so he can take a minute and think about it. And this is better already. He's not leaving. So that's really good. And then he's going to lick and chew here and relax a bit. I mean, he was a little tense there as I was tossing the lash over his withers, which I should have probably slowed down a little bit more so he's not quite as tense. There, he thought about leaving and then he didn't. So that's really, really good. So I'm going to give him a break. Just let him hang out for a second. Come back. So again, I'm doing the same thing on this side. I'm just going to rub and then just toss it over his withers and then take it off and back up. So I'm trying not to chase him with it. I want it just to be there for a second, and then I back right up and release that pressure. So again, make sure step one, are you okay with this touching your neck? Great. Okay. Are you okay with this on your withers? Great. Perfect. And then I retreat. And then he shakes his head. He's going to lick his lips. He's going to turn away. He's kind of relax a little bit here. So he's making progress. I'd like him to be a little bit more relaxed, but he is shaking his head and then licking his lips. So he is relaxing some. So he's looking around. He's still engaging with his environment. So he's not shut down. He's not doing too much, or I'm not doing too much to really push him to where he's going to just stand there and take it and freeze. So that's good. And then we're going to work on a bit of a draw here. So I'd like him to kind of go around the mounting block. And then I was like, just come forward. Because my original thing was for him to go to the right of the screen and go around. And then I was like, just come forward. Then he wants to leave here. That's okay. I'm going to keep my whips up and keep asking until I get what I wanted. So I'm going to ask him to go the opposite way that he left and then go back into that draw. There we go. So then I'm going to ask him to go the other way. I'm going to keep my whip there. There we go. Release. So again, with the whips here, now that I'm going back through this footage, especially with Atlas, I definitely want to work on more of targeting whips and going toward them versus away from them, at least in the beginning. So I definitely think it's important for horses to move away from pressure and know what that means. But I also don't want a ton of fear in there. So especially in the beginning, I want them to be targets to where he can touch it, he can follow it, and then kind of go into a place where he knows what that is. Then I can have him move away from the pressure and then click for him moving away. So every time like I pick up my whip and I ask him to move his shoulders, he moves away, he gets a reward. So then I can go into the moving away from pressure in that way versus the way I started both of them, both the Mustangs in, was just move away from pressure, and I felt like that kept a lot more fear in there. So here we are going to go into some leading, which he's done a ton better from the last session in the round pen. He's following more. He's still a little skeptical of the lashes on the ground, but he is leading closer and coming forward more readily, so that's really nice. And he's following closer too, so this is really good. And he's got like a nice bend in his body, so he's looking at me, he's following me. Some of that might be he's like a little cautious of the lash on the ground, but I want him to see it and to have it follow and to not be a big deal. I don't want him to be worried about those things, because whips are going to be part of his life, so they don't need to be a scary thing. I'm going to just give him some breaks. We'll stop, rub on him, make sure he's okay, kind of go the other way. I just wanted to drive that shoulder over and then just keep holding that whip up until the rest of his body goes forward, and then I put it down, and then I just have him follow me. And I just kept doing that, just like teaching a horse to lunge. I just push him forward. Once he starts going forward, then I'll just walk away. And then if he stops, I'll just ask him again, just like in the last video. So right here he stopped, so I'll ask him to go forward. He's like, no, I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to say, no, I asked you to go to the left, just gentle, not going to chase him, not going to scare him. Just say, hey, can you go to the left? That's where we were going. Can you follow me that way? Perfect. So again, training this, using positive reinforcement, I would just use the whips out as a target. So I would just hold them straight out from my body and my arm, like just in a straight line, and have him follow it. So I do want them to learn to move away from the pressure, but in the beginning, I think that's going to build a lot more confidence than just kind of associating the whips with just pressure. So, but he is leading decently. So if you don't want to use the positive reinforcement, this is a way to do it. So, but just in that one session, you can see how much progress he's made. So he didn't want to be pet there, so he moved his head away. I was like, that's fine. I leaned back, he brought his head back, and then I could pet him on the face. So I'm not going to chase him around. I'm going to say, if you don't want your face touched, that's okay. So I just want to listen to him as much as possible. Again, spoiled, pushy horses are a bit different. Atlas is neither of those things, so I'm not going to force him to do anything. I don't want to force a pushy horse to do anything either, but I would approach it slightly differently. So he's leading quite nice here. He's up by my shoulder. He's looking at me. He doesn't seem super worried about the whips dragging on the ground. So, and I can go and touch him afterward, and he's not super worried about that. And I can work on kind of working my way down to his front legs. So that's pretty good. And then see if there we go. He'll follow, and he's kind of relaxing down in his neck a little bit. And I didn't have to use the whips at all there. He just followed after. So that's pretty cool. See if he'll follow me through a turn. He got a little distracted because there's like some food on the other side, but that was pretty good. And he remained nice and relaxed. His neck's nice and level, and he just kind of relaxes as he follows me. So that's pretty good. There we go. Go to the other side, make some turns. So once we've gotten that straight line where he understands that he's supposed to follow, then we'll work on doing some turns. Some inside turns where he just follows will be easier, and then some turns where I'm on the outside of him will be next, and work on those a little bit later. But he's doing pretty good. And then go in and just make sure he's nice and okay with you and desensitize a little bit before we end.